Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Worldview. My name is Chris Greco. I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes. We'll talk about issues that are happening in the world that are very rarely touched by U.S. media because we're more worried about March Madness and whether or not one of our ex-presidents are going to get arrested and things that are very, very, very important in the world, that type of thing. And yes, it does sound I do sound facetious, and I'm sorry, but the United States is geographically illiterate. They do not understand, most of the people in the United States do not understand even where some major continents are. So it's very, very interesting to see how this, hopefully, this show brings in a sense of, hey, look, there is other stuff outside of the United States. And if we don't get our issues solved here, we're going to end up in this chasm that's part of what the world is in now. So we have to really be careful about that. If we want to be this worldview thing, then we have to be able to understand what's going on in other areas. So we're going to hit two different areas today, actually three. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and China, and that's kind of at the end of this. But what we're going to talk about is France in trouble and Black Sea issues, both of those separate issues in this worldview episode. So let's go ahead and get started. So France is in trouble right now, and a lot of people, hopefully, you're seeing other than on Good Morning America or someplace like that where they don't really, they handle international news in about 13 microseconds. But these morning shows are just unbelievable. Anyways, don't get me started on that. So France basically is in trouble. Here's what's happening: the French president, along with the French prime minister. Now, these are two different people. And this is really interesting. A lot of people sit there and say, oh, the French president has complete power. That's not altogether true. Now, the French president is an elected individual, but he or she appoints the prime minister. So you have a president. It's not like Britain. Britain has a prime minister. That's what they have. They don't have a president. And we have a president, but we don't have a prime minister. In France's case, they have both. They have a president elected, and they have a prime minister that's appointed. So they extended the retirement age. Now think about this just for a second, folks. And this is just something that you need to think about. Is they extended only 2 years, now from 62 to 64. Protests went nuts. They just went crazy in that country. I mean, strikes and and this is typical university stuff, university student stuff. They blocked the entrance way to the French universities. I, it's like okay, I just don't I just don't understand how that is to be somehow. I guess that's just optics. I don't know, but they did things like that. Garbage people, the refuse people, they're striking. So there's no refuse pickup. Now that is a problem. Back a few decades ago, actually, and since then, there's been a couple of garbage people strike in different cities. One of which was New York City, and that is just, oh my gosh, you talk about a mess. It's happened in Rome. It's happened in Paris. It's happened in different areas. In, of course, Paris now. Mainly centered around individuals. Now, everybody. Okay, so let's go back. The protests state that the reason that they're upset, the protesters are upset, is because there are people out there that are working very hard that have to work 2 more years, including garbage people, public support, that type of thing. It's hard. It's hard work, and I mean first responders, all that, and they're having to work 2 more years in order to retire. Now, let's get down to how does it affect the normal individual, right? They have to still serve 2 years. But it's interesting how, along with that, they want to go down to a 35-hour work week. So it's just so anyways, or a 30-hour work week, or whatever they want, lower than a 40-hour work week. So it's interesting how that is all happening at practically the same time. So what you're telling me is you want to work less, but you still don't want to work the number work less hours, but not, you don't want to put in the 2 years extra. Anyways, I'm getting cynical here. So protests continue because Parliament was not involved. Now, this is interesting because one reporter commented that the Parliament doesn't want to get involved because the elections were approaching. And if you have these right-wing politicians that don't want to say okay to it because they're getting elected, and you got the left-wing politicians that don't want to say we don't want this because they're getting elected, so they're kind of staying out of the whole thing. And basically, what's happening is the president, parliament, president, and the prime minister are kind of making this decision, kind of like an executive order type thing. And people are saying, "Whoa, whoa, Parliament needs to get involved. We have elected representatives. What's going on? Blah blah blah." It goes on, blah, blah, all and on. The French people are all granted a pension at 62. It's not like Social Security, folks. This is basically a French citizen right. When you hit 62, you get a pension. So the pension is running out of money. And does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like maybe Social Security is running out of money and Medicare is running out of money? Well, the French literally are running out of money. Now, Macron, who's the French president, stated that the prime minister is the one who announced it. Macron, the president, said he supports it. And that's how this works. The prime minister is taking the heat, lots and lots of heat. Macron, in the meantime, is out there doing trips to Africa and all other places trying to get oil and oil pipelines in and everything else. So it's interesting how this poor prime minister is basically being put up on the chopping block. Not saying it literally, but figuratively on the chopping block to the guillotine still comes in, guillotine still comes into mind there. But anyways, the chopping block to be able to suffer the slings and arrows, of everybody, people, the press, everyone else, and the French president is kind of sitting back saying, well, hey, yeah, I agree. We need to do this, but we need to do it so that we can do different types of, financial aspects. It's very, 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 very important. So, what's the difference between president, prime minister? I went through it. President is elected, prime minister is appointed by the president, right? The prime minister was the one that announced the retirement. President agreed, but because otherwise there'd be serious fiscal issues, which he doesn't want to combat. Nobody else does either. And then I talked about that, right? So U.S. budget for Social Security numerically be exhausted within the next 7 to 10 years. I think that was the last estimate. You can actually look this up. And this is why I put this on the GrecTech channel, is because this has to do with data. I don't just make this stuff up. I pull it from different sources, different data sources, different aspects, and most of the time it's open press. So this stuff is available to you, at any time. The U.S. for Medicare will reach $0 in about 7 to 10 years. So all these things are just like, we got a real big problem here, and that's basically Medicare Part A is going to just go, it's going to be gone. So we could have a problem. Could have a definite problem here. So what's going to happen next? Well, France is in trouble, big trouble. Massive strikes, protests, leaving the country hamstrung. Public services are wanting. Garbage and other services are on strike. The protests disrupting tourist attractions. Nobody wants to, of course, you have to remember it's March. So, April in Paris is a big deal. For those of you that don't know, April in Paris is supposed to be very romantic, all that stuff. So people are going to be going to Paris in April. They want to get this thing done by April. So I can make probably a pretty solid prognostication here, is that by April this thing will be solved. One way or another, it's going to be solved, because then you get into the tourist industry. Get into the tourist industry, which benefits everybody. All of a sudden, restaurants aren't going to be getting the people. There's going to be a lot of issues with, the Eiffel Tower, the rest of the place, the Champs-Elysees, or as Bugs Bunny says it, the Champs-Elysees. All these areas are going to be hitting problems with tourism. So it was interesting. One reporter referred to the government as being the French president and prime minister, and I thought that was so interesting. It's so telling that I guess, and I'm assuming they meant administration. Kind of like we talk about when we talk about government, we could talk about any type of government, right? But mainly we're talking about federal government, and that includes all areas. When we talk about government this, government regulation, government that, blah blah blah. That's all. The cabinet departments, the cabinet areas. All these things are government, right? Administration means presidential administration. Well, in this situation, they're talking about government as being president and prime minister, and that just that threw me for a loop. And it was France 24, the media, and they had a reporter say that in France. And I thought, that's so curious, curiouser and curiouser. So that I thought that was interesting. So prognostication, April, this is all going to be solved out. Whatever's going to happen, either police are going to go in there and bust the stuff up, or else you're going to see some difference. Or they may say, well, instead of 2 years, we'll do 1 year. So instead of 62 to 64, we'll do 62 to 63. And then the next year they'll go 63 to 64. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they work that out. But I think the 1 year thing is probably going to be a good compromise. All right, let's move over to the other side of the area, which is Black Sea. And so I want to first, I want to show you where the Black Sea is. I think this is very important, and I think a lot of people do not understand about the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, all these different areas. So I'm going to show you the Black Sea. This is Black Sea right here. Now take a look at this. What you have is you have what they call the Bosporus Straits. Now it doesn't look like, you sit back and you go, well, Chris, how do they get to the Black Sea? They get to the Black Sea through the Bosporus Straits right here, and then through here, and then through here. So all that, the Bosporus Straits you get through, and guess where you end up? You end up, great. So this is the Mediterranean here. So if you take a look at the Black Sea, and you take a look at what's going on here, so this is the Crimean Peninsula. Okay, in fact, you can just see it. It should show it. Where is it? It should show it. Where is it? Anyways, it's Crimean Peninsula, and it's Russian owned. Now, was it always Russian owned? No, it was not. Interestingly enough, it was part of Ukraine until 2014, when Russia annexed it. Now, they annexed it 2014. I won't mention who the president was, we won't mention who the vice president was, but basically they took this entire area without firing a shot. Thank you, West Europe and Western nations. So basically they took that without a shot being fired. Boom, there it is. So they have all this. What is this? Those are all the ports. Now, when there was a Soviet Union, this area right here was basically a Black Sea port area. That's where they put their submarines. The Soviet Union, now Russia. That's where they put their missile carriers or aircraft, all that. Specifically Sevastopol, they really liked that area. Why? Because it was very good getting to the Med. Now let's take a look at some of their other ports. The other ports they're up in here. Okay. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, it gets cold to the point where some of these are ice covered. So you have a problem with trying to get all the way. Now, let's say you want to get to the Med, where let's say you're over here somewhere, in these ports over here. It means you have to go over here, around your enemies, through Gibraltar, which is owned by Spain, which is a member of NATO, all the way through just to get to the Med. And then what do you have? Well, you have NATO member nations all along in this area. So you really don't have a real good ability to be able to do what you need to do quickly. But here at the Black Sea, oh yeah, you do. When I was an intelligence officer, I remember that we used to put the vessels in here. We still have vessels in here in the Black Sea. Now, what the Russians try to do is they try to say they tried to shoot down. Well, they actually tried to shoot down a drone. They just kind of poured fuel on it or whatever, knocked it down. The problem is that according to us, it was in international waters. Black Sea is international water. It's not owned by any particular individual other than within whatever it is, 12 miles of the coast or whatever that current area is where it's territorial waters. So if you're in the middle of this thing, you're pretty much not near. I mean, you're clear of Turkey, you're clear of Georgia, you're clear of all these areas. You don't have to worry about that stuff. So it tends to be a problem whenever you're shot down in the middle of Black Sea. Now, what happens is that you have all these areas, and they don't want to have somebody spying on them, specifically on the port areas where they have their submarines and they have their aircraft carriers and they have everything else, which is all along in this area. Again, especially along Sevastopol, they really like that area. So this is the area where they're very, very, very sensitive about. And even if you're flying over in this area, now you have to take a look at it. So let's take a look at how many, what we're talking about. So what's the distance here? So if I were to measure a distance, let's say between Sevastopol, well, let's say between this coastline, right? Um, here's 20 miles. Here's 20 nautical miles right here. There's 20 nautical miles. So I mean, if it was flying anywhere other than that, then that could be a problem. I mean, it's not international waters, okay, or it is international waters if they're flying beyond that. So what is it about this, right? I mean, so here's what they used to tell us in intelligence. This is 28 nautical miles. This is what they used to tell us in intelligence. It's not what your radar says, it's what their radar says. So we could read, hey, we were in national waters. If the Russians believed that we were not, then we should have known that. We should have understood that. We should have, I'm not saying it's anybody's fault here, other than the fact that there's two different countries, Russia and US, and the US had an asset that was flying along this area. So you have to be kind of careful about where you're flying and understand where the Russians think you're flying. So that's important, and that's what intelligence is supposed to do. Evidently, since I've been in intelligence, we don't evidently do that well. That's my opinion only. But that's why the Black Sea is so important, and that's why it's very important to be able to understand that. So, the Black Sea, constant reminder: Russia does not have ports that are available 12 months of the year. They don't. They do in the Black Sea, so that's why it's very important. Black Sea Russian ports has historically been a major threat to NATO and the Med. In fact, sorry, it's interesting how sometimes so sometimes what has to happen is that uh, there has to be a check. There has to be like how chess is. You have little check areas, but that's what it is. You put in U.S. ships in that area just to check the Russian naval threat, because the Bosporus Straits, as I showed you, are open to any shipping. Now, what's happening is the Turkish are starting to close the Bosporus Straits because they are considering it to be an active war area. So if they're closing that to shipping, except for grain shipping probably, then the U.S. cannot get shipping in there. So the only way that we're going to be able to do what we need to do is to do drones. And that's probably why the drone was in there. The drone incident is a perfect example of how Russia feels the Black Sea is theirs. I mean, just giving them Crimea, and literally the European community in toto gave Russia Crimea. They gave it to them. You can sit there and say, oh, it's annexed, whatever else. That's horse poop. Basically, they were granted the ability to take that territory without a shot. Compare the statements from Russia to the statements from U.S. over the Chinese balloon incident. Compare them. Russia, that drone could be carrying Hellfire missiles, and therefore they could, it could be lethal weapon against Russian shipping. U.S. Chinese balloon could carry weapons, and therefore it could be lethal against, U.S. missiles and everything else that we have there. It didn't respond whenever we interrogated it. Chinese balloon didn't respond whenever. You can go over, around, round, and round, and round. So basically, the way the Russians think of their territory is the same way we think about our airspace. Hey, you come over our airspace, even though, as I've stated in the past, that the airspace, regulated airspace, basically kind of finishes at 60,000 feet, MSL. And this is a problem because you sit back and you go, okay, well, if it's 60,000 feet, then above that is basically open airspace. That's true. Even though FAA says it goes from 60,000 to undefined, well, that's or infinity or whatever it is. That's a bunch of horse poop again, because that means we're going to be shooting down. Are we going to be shooting down satellites that are crossing over our airspace, even if it's space? So it gets a little bit ridiculous. Visit from China. China's leader is visiting Russia this week. We know that. Some intelligence analysts believe it will include giving weapons to Russia. I think that is so much hyperbole. And I'll tell you something. It's getting me, being a prior intelligence officer, I get just a little bit perturbed about the fact that all these intelligence analysts out there that write books and sit there and say, "Oh, I was used to be in the DIA and blah blah blah, 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 all that stuff." The bottom line is this: is that they're not opening their minds to other possibilities. Yeah, China may talk about weapons. Hey, we'll give you some weapons. Maybe we'll give some lethal stuff. Maybe we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think this may be one of the topics. The main topic will be the abrogation of Russia finances to China-run Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We already talked about the SCO. I have a current slide on there. It shows, as of now, what the countries are, and it looks like I was right. I was looking at some dated stuff. That Saudi Arabia and Iran will both eventually become part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This SCO is becoming increasingly powerful and increasingly worrisome to people like me looking at it. I'm very surprised it's not increasingly worrisome to the intelligence community, because they should have to me, an entire section just on SCO and taking a look at those countries and whatever else. They may, I'm not saying they don't, but if they don't, they better dang well get one going, because this is getting a little bit ridiculous. Russia's always stated in previous SCO meetings that they did not have an issue with making their finances part of the SCO finances. Now, China doesn't run the SCO. Behind the scenes, they actually do. The current president for the SCO is India. India is going to be, because this rotates, and India is going to be the next president, the next chair, whatever you want to call it, of the SCO. Think about this just for 1 second. India is producing steel. India is mining coal. India is part of, believe it or not, is allied with the United States. So is Pakistan. Guess what Pakistan is involved with? SCO. India and Pakistan are both part of the SCO, along with Iran and Saudi Arabia. So think about this. What this will do is similar to the Franco-British Agreement in 1940, which would make the two countries joint venture. Now, the agreement never went through in 1940. De Gaulle was in Britain. It was funny how he, Mr. War Hero, spent most of his time in Britain. But anyways, and this is again, facetiousness on my part. But bottom line is that at one point they had figured out an agreement where both Britain and France would fall under the same auspices, financially, economically, politically, and all that stuff, and they would be a joint venture to be able to battle the Nazis together. De Gaulle was pleased with it. Went back to Reynaud. Reynaud was the prime minister. He says, "Yeah, this is good." And the French military, the older French military, said that basically in just something like, hey, we'd rather be part of Nazi Germany because at least we know what to expect. So basically Reynaud was gone. The individual, an ex-French general, took over, and then you had Vichy France and all that. So, so that never really came about, but this could come about. You could have a Sino-Russian agreement that is very, 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 very tight. So the Black Sea incident may be just the thing to push Russia to cooperate more fully with China as the major power and Russia as the old guard. And so that's what's happening there. So let's take a look at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the current stuff. Member countries: China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. a seeding membership, which means these are the ones that could in fact come up and become full member countries: Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran, Mongolia twice, but basically, Mongolia, right? Dialogue partners: Armenia, Azerbaijan, kind of sworn enemies, but they're part of SCO. Cambodia, Nepal, Turkey. Turkey is a NATO country. It's going to be part of. It's going to be part. It's the only. I think it's the only NATO country in here. So, I mean, that's kind of scary. Sri Lanka, Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, as of 2021, their dialogue partners. There's a source at the bottom. You can take a look at that. So, I mean, that's what we're talking about. So, this is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's scary. Look at it. Look at it. I think this is very, very, very scary. When you take a look at all these things. So I think that's something to consider, and it's something to make sure that we understand exactly what's going on here. Because I'll tell you, if the Shanghai Cooperation Organization sits back and says, okay, this is what we're going to do, and they have the ability to do it through finances or whatever else, then we're going to be in trouble. We're going to be in big trouble. Because basically what's going to happen is that these countries are going to be able to determine our destiny. So that's not going to be a real good position that we're in at this point, being the United States of America, because we're over on the other side of the Atlantic, folks. Western Europe is there. Now, France, again, France is kind of sitting back, and I'm writing a book right now based on the premise and a question, rhetorical or not, of why we should continue to trust France, because it's they're out to make themselves a major power. France has always been out there to make themselves a major power, and they did it through negotiations, did it through different aspects. But bottom line is they want to be the go-to country in Western Europe to sit back and say, we are basically the leader of the entire Western European area. And that, to me, is a problem. And I'm surprised France hasn't joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'm waiting for them to do it. So, there's Saudi Arabia, 2021. They're going in there, and basically what's happened is that's going to be a major issue. So that pretty much does it for this episode of the Worldview. Now the bottom line on this whole thing is this: is that the U.S., the United States, I'm sure, I just have this real funny feeling that the U.S. has intelligence people that are sitting back and figuring this thing out, much like I'm doing it. They're probably they're tons better than I am, tons better. But the problem is there's a ton of them, and that they're probably battling back and forth as to which information is most important and which one should be taken and which one blah blah blah, goes on and on and on. So the bottom line is this: that the Black Sea incident points to something much greater than just the downing of an MQ-9. It points to how far the Russians are willing to push their territorial hegemony all the way out into the middle of that Black Sea. And that's something that we'll have to be wary of and understand is going to happen in the future. And on that note, this is Chris Greco for the Worldview saying thanks for watching, and see you next time.